The rancher wasn't always broken. 20 years ago, he owned 300 acres of good grazing land, a reputation for honest work, and a wife who laughed at his jokes. Then came the drought, 5 years of it, followed by market collapse, medical debt, and a silence in the house that no amount of work could fill. By the time she left, he'd stopped believing he had anything left to offer. The bank notices piled up. The fences rotted. He moved through the days like a ghost, mechanically waiting for the foreclosure notice that would make it all official. Then, one October morning, a border collie appeared at his gate, lean, scarred, and wild-eyed, as if she'd been running from something her whole life. He should have called animal control. Instead, he left the gate open. What followed wasn't a rescue story in the sentimental sense. It was something quieter and harder. Two broken things, learning that survival and redemption aren't the same as happiness, and that sometimes saving each other means simply showing up, day after day, with no guarantee of a happy ending. But it was a beginning. The rancher didn't know it yet, but the dog had already chosen him, and he was about to discover that being called broken doesn't mean you're worthless. It just means you haven't met the right mirror yet. Chapter 1. The gate. The morning she came through the gate, I almost didn't notice her. I was fixing the north fence. Same fence I'd been meaning to fix for 3 years when movement caught my eye. A border collie, black and white, ribs showing like a xylophone through her coat. She moved low and deliberate, the way her breed does, with that bred-in crouch that says I was built to herd, to think, to matter. But her eyes were empty, no light behind them, just survival. I stopped hammering. She stopped too, about 15 feet away, watching me the way prey watches a predator, except I wasn't the predator anymore. I was just a man in a sweat-stained shirt, holding a fence post that wouldn't stay straight. "You lost," I called out. My voice cracked. I hadn't used it much lately, not for actual conversation. She didn't answer, obviously. Dogs don't. But she didn't run either. That was something. I left the fence and walked to the barn, slow and deliberate, the way you approach a wild thing. I found half a can of dog food in the storage room, something from before, from when I still bought things with hope attached to them. I set it outside the barn door and walked away. By evening, the can was empty. I told myself it didn't matter. A stray would pass through, eat, move on. That's what strays do. They don't stay because staying requires believing in something, and strays have learned not to believe in anything. I understood that. I'd been learning it too. But when I woke at 4 in the morning, insomnia again, always insomnia, I found her sleeping on the porch, curled tight as a fist, her breathing the only sound in the dark, not threatening, not asking, just there. I should have chased her off. Instead, I went back to bed and left her alone. By daylight, she was gone. But the fence post I'd been working on was still there, still crooked, still waiting. And I knew with a quiet certainty that scared me that she'd be back. The bank wasn't calling anymore. They'd already won. My ex-wife had stopped writing letters 3 years ago. The silence had become normal. But this dog, this small act of showing up, felt like the universe was testing me, testing whether I could recognize a thing worth keeping, even when I'd stopped believing I deserved to keep anything. I fixed that fence post properly, straight and true, not for the dog, for myself, just to prove I still could. Chapter 2. The name. She came back at dusk, exactly as I'd known she would. This time I was ready. I'd bought dog food, actual good dog food, from town. I'd set out an old bucket of water on the porch. I'd even cleared a space in the barn where the worst of the wind wouldn't reach her. For 3 weeks, that was the arrangement. She'd appear in the evening, eat, drink, and disappear into the scrub by morning. I never saw where she went during the day. Part of me wondered if she was real, if I'd finally cracked and was feeding a ghost born from too much silence and too many years alone. But then came the night she didn't leave. It was November, the first cold snap after a warm autumn. I found her in the barn, shivering, her breathing shallow. I almost called the vet. Then I remembered I couldn't afford the vet. I remembered I'd let this ranch crumble because I couldn't afford anything anymore, so I brought her inside instead. It was the first time I'd let anyone, anything, share my space in 4 years. The house felt smaller with her in it, less like a mausoleum. She settled on the old rug in front of the wood stove and watched me move around the kitchen like I was the most interesting thing she'd ever seen. "You need a name," I said, standing there with my hands full of nothing. She tilted her head. "Smart dog. Border collies always know when you're talking to them." "You look like you've been through hell," I continued, and something in my chest cracked a little. "But you came back anyway. That takes something. That takes—" I couldn't find the word. Courage, faith, stubbornness. "Grace," I said finally. "Your name is Grace." She didn't react, but she rested her chin on her paws and closed her eyes. And I swear to God, she looked relieved, like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to call her by her real name and mean it. I sat down on the floor beside her. The first time in years I'd done something just for the sake of comfort. And in that moment, I understood. I hadn't saved her. She'd chosen to be here. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something. If you're enjoying this journey so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Chapter 3. The work winter came early that year, and Grace came with it. She didn't ask to stay. Border collies don't ask. They decide. She moved through the ranch like she'd always been there, like she was surveying the damage and calculating what it would take to fix it. The crooked fence posts, the barn roof with the patched-over leaks that didn't actually work, the corrals where the gates hung loose and useless, the whole operation, really. A monument to a man who'd stopped fighting. And something in watching her notice it all made me want to fight again. I started small. The fence post I'd fixed before, I did 3 more. Then a week of mornings dedicated to the southern corral. Grace would follow me, and I'd catch her watching my hands, my movements, like she was learning the language of repair. Border collies are workers. It's in their blood. You put them on a ranch, and they understand immediately that there's a job to do. So I gave her one. "We're going to fix this place," I told her one morning, my hands already cold in the pre-dawn dark. "I don't know if we can save it. I don't even know if I want to save it, but we can try. That's what work is, isn't it? Just trying." Grace's tail wagged. One sweep, steady and sure. The first real breakthrough came in late December. I was replacing rotted boards on the barn's east wall when I found something, a leather wallet, wedged into the gap between an old beam and the original stone foundation. It was weathered nearly to nothing, but inside was a photograph. My grandfather, younger than I'd ever seen him, standing in this exact barn with a border collie that looked almost exactly like Grace. On the back, in faded pencil, "Duke and me, 1952. This land remembers. Don't forget." I sat down right there in the cold, the photo in my trembling hands, and cried. Not for my grandfather, for myself, for the 4 years I'd spent pretending this place meant nothing when it meant everything. Grace came and sat beside me, and I understood then. She wasn't a stray. She was a reminder. That night, I called a contractor to get a real estimate on the barn repairs. For the first time in years, I was thinking about next spring. Chapter 4. The storm. January brought rain, 3 days of it relentless and cold, the kind that tests every roof and reveals every weakness. The barn roof held, barely, but the old equipment shed collapsed on the east side, and water got into the main house through the kitchen wall. I'd been monitoring that spot for months, knowing it was coming, too tired to care until it actually happened. Grace and I spent the morning moving things, boxes, old machinery manuals, a trunk of my wife's that I still couldn't throw away. We dragged the heaviest items to higher ground. Working together, we moved faster than I could have alone. She seemed to know what was fragile and what could take the weight. She nudged boxes with her nose, herded them towards safety like they were sheep. By noon, we'd salvaged most of it. The rain continued anyway. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey I'd bought months ago and never touched. I hadn't felt tempted until then. But looking at the water damage, thinking about the cost of repairs, the contractor's estimate for the barn, the property taxes still overdue, it all crashed down at once. The hope of December felt stupid, naive. The work I'd done, the walker I'd found, the decision to keep going, it all felt like a joke I was playing on myself. Grace came and sat at my feet. She put her head on my knee and refused to move. "This isn't going to work," I told her. "We're not going to save this. We're going to lose it anyway, and I'm just going to feel worse when we do." She looked at me with those dark eyes, and I swear there was no judgment in them, just presence, just witness. I put the whiskey down without opening it. Chapter 5. The letter. The water damage forced my hand. I had to get that contractor out here, and I had to get the bank's permission to spend money on repairs. I hadn't talked to the bank in 2 years. I'd been avoiding them the way you avoid mirrors after you've hit bottom. The call took 45 minutes. The loan officer, a woman named Patricia, who'd been surprisingly kind across 3 previous conversations, told me something that changed everything. "Mr. Hansen, there's a notation on your file. A letter came through about 3 months ago. It's from your grandfather's estate attorney. The letter got flagged for your property, but it was never forwarded to you because your address had been marked as Do Not Contact." I went still. "What letter?" "You need to call them directly. The firm is Brennan and Associates in the county seat. They've been trying to reach you. The estate matter is time-sensitive." I hung up and just sat there, Grace's head heavy on my lap. An estate? My grandfather had died 15 years ago. There was nothing left, or so I'd thought. My uncle had handled everything. There was no inheritance worth mentioning, just the land I was about to lose anyway. But what if there was? Grace watched me stand up, watched me find the phone book and look up the number, watched me dial with hands that were shaking. The attorney's office could see me the next morning. That was all they'd say over the phone. But the tone in their voice, careful, official, significant, told me this wasn't routine. That night I barely slept. Grace didn't sleep either. She paced the house like she knew something was coming, like she was ready for whatever it was. If this rural redemption story has you hooked, hit like, it helps us keep these true-to-life tales alive. Chapter 6. The Revelation. Brennan and Associates occupied a small office above a barbershop in town, and I walked in there the next morning like a man entering a courtroom. The attorney, a thin woman in her 60s named Ellen Brennan, had a file on her desk with my name on it. "Mr. Hansen, thank you for coming. I'll be direct. Your grandfather left a secondary will, not with his estate attorney, with us. He wanted specific conditions met before it was revealed." "What conditions?" My voice didn't sound like my own. "He wanted you to restore the property to working condition, not sell it, not let it fall to ruin. He wanted the land alive again. He left explicit instructions. If the property fell into disrepair beyond a certain point, the inheritance would pass to the State Land Trust instead." She slid a document toward me. "Your recent repairs, the fence posts, the contractor's assessment, the effort you've demonstrated in the last 3 months, all of it was being monitored by a representative of this office. You met the condition, Mr. Hansen. The letter found in your barn, the wallet with your grandfather's photograph, he'd arranged for that to be placed there decades ago. He believed you'd find it when you were ready to listen." I couldn't breathe. "What's the amount?" $240,000. to be held in trust for property restoration and maintenance. It's contingent on your keeping the land and working it. Sell it, and the money reverts. But if you stay, if you keep it alive, it's yours, and it has been technically since he died. You just had to prove you were worthy of it. I left that office in a daze. Grace was waiting in the truck, and when I opened the door, she jumped up and rested her paws on my shoulders, her whole body trembling with something that looked an awful lot like joy. "We're staying," I told her. "We're actually staying." Chapter 7. The Rebuild. With money and purpose, both suddenly real, the work shifted from desperate to strategic. I hired contractors who knew what they were doing. The barn roof was repaired properly. The house got new windows and actual waterproofing. The corrals were rebuilt with new gates, new fencing, new everything. But I did the work myself where I could. The smaller repairs, the details, the love work that only an owner can do. Grace was everywhere during that rebuild. She'd heard the contractors around like they were her sheep, nipping at their heels when they worked too slow, settling on the porch when the day's work was done. The contractors loved her. They started bringing her treats, calling her by name, asking about her history. Found her starving, I'd tell them, and they'd nod like that explained everything it needed to explain. By spring, the ranch looked like a working place again, not rich, not grand, just honest. Solid fences, clean water troughs, a barn that didn't look like it was about to collapse. I bought new equipment, hired a part-time hand, and started taking on neighboring herds to manage during peak seasons. The money from my grandfather sat in an account, growing interest, waiting for the next phase. But I didn't spend it recklessly. I spent it like he'd have wanted, careful, thoughtful, building something that would last. One afternoon in late April, my ex-wife drove up to the ranch. I hadn't seen her in 3 years. Chapter 8. The Visit. She got out of the car slowly, like she wasn't sure she was welcome. She wasn't really, but I didn't turn her away. "I heard you were fixing the place up," she said, looking around at the new fencing, the repaired barn, the general air of intentionality the ranch had reclaimed. "Yeah. Turns out my grandfather left me something." "That's not what I heard. I heard you found something. In the barn. And then you found a dog." She looked at Grace, who was lying on the porch, watching us both with that alert, intelligent gaze. "Is that her?" "That's Grace. Pretty name." We stood in the awkward silence of people who'd once shared a bed and now shared almost nothing. "I made a mistake," she said finally. "Leaving, not because I wanted to stay with you, I didn't. We were both drowning, but I made a mistake in how I did it. I didn't think you were worth saving. I thought you were just done." "I almost was," I admitted. "But you weren't." "No, I wasn't." She looked at the ranch again, at the work I'd done, at Grace, and something softened in her face. Not love, not reconciliation, just recognition. The understanding that sometimes people change, and sometimes they do it for reasons that have nothing to do with the people who left them. "I'm happy for you," she said, and I believed her. After she left, Grace came and sat beside me on the porch, and we watched the sun move across our repaired, rebuilt, reclaimed land. I put my hand on her head, and she leaned into it, and we didn't need to say anything because the work had said it all. Chapter 9. The Autumn. A year had passed since the day Grace came through the gate. The ranch ran at full capacity now, managed, maintained, profitable in a quiet way that suggested stability rather than wealth. I'd hired 2 full-time hands and a seasonal crew. The equipment was reliable, the fences held, the barn didn't leak, but the real change was internal. I'd stopped waking up with the weight of a stone on my chest. I'd started laughing again. I'd joined a local ranchers' cooperative and was helping other smaller operations repair their equipment. I'd even started dating a woman named Sarah, who ran a feed store and didn't seem bothered by my history or my quietness. The community had welcomed me back, too, quietly, without fanfare, the way rural people do. I was no longer the man whose farm was falling apart. I was no longer the man who'd given up. I was just a rancher who'd chosen to stay and chosen to work. And somehow, that made all the difference. One afternoon in early October, almost a year to the day that Grace arrived, I was working on the northern fence, different section, all new posts now, when she came and lay down at the edge of the work area, the way she always did. "You know what I figured out?" I told her, tamping down soil around a new post. My grandfather wasn't testing me to see if I was worthy. He was leaving me something to teach me that I already was. That broken doesn't mean worthless. That staying is its own kind of courage. Grace's tail thumped against the dry grass. "And you knew that the whole time, didn't you? You came to this place knowing you belonged here, knowing I belonged here. You just had to wait for me to figure it out." She closed her eyes, satisfied. The sun was setting now, turning the whole ranch golden. The fences were all straight, the land was all whole. And I was finally, truly home. Land remembers the hands that work it, and loyalty remembers the hearts that choose to stay. We never stop being broken. We just learn what to do with the pieces. Subscribe for more real-life stories of loyalty, land, and second chances. See you in the next one.